MAGA is eating itself alive, and while watching their collapse is entertaining, the real gift they gave us was proving that everything Black America has been saying about this country for 400 years was absolutely correct. November 4th, 2025 was a bloodbath for Republicans. They lost New York City, they lost Virginia, they lost New Jersey, they watched California set up a system to redraw congressional maps that could cost them 5 House seats. Across the board, in what should have been competitive races, Republicans got destroyed. And in the aftermath of these losses, something fascinating is happening inside the MAGA movement. It's tearing itself apart. The infighting is real. The finger-pointing is vicious. The recriminations are loud. Vice President J.D. Vance is trying to calm everyone down, trying to hold the coalition together, trying to prevent complete collapse. But it's not working. President Trump is frustrated, lashing out on social media, blaming everyone except himself for the losses. The government shutdown that he championed has become toxic. The policies that energize the base are now driving away voters. And the movement that seemed unstoppable just a few years ago is showing serious cracks. So the question becomes, will MAGA exist after President Trump leaves office? And my answer is complicated because while the movement might survive in some form, what we're witnessing right now is the beginning of its collapse as a dominant political force. But more importantly, what MAGA has done, perhaps inadvertently, is expose America in ways that are incredibly valuable for Black Americans to understand and leverage. Let me start with what's happening right now within MAGA, because it's important to understand the dynamics of a political movement in crisis. The recent election losses have created chaos. MAGA figures are blaming each other. Some are blaming Trump for backing the wrong candidates. Some are blaming the candidates for running poor campaigns. Some are blaming the messaging. Some are blaming the media. Some are blaming voter fraud, even though there's no evidence. Some are blaming the government shutdown for turning voters against them. Everyone has a scapegoat, and nobody wants to accept responsibility for the fact that their policies and their rhetoric are deeply unpopular with the majority of Americans. J.D. Vance is in an impossible position. As vice president, he's supposed to be Trump's loyal second, but he also sees the writing on the wall. He knows that if MAGA continues on this trajectory, they're heading for even bigger losses in 2026. So he's trying to be the voice of reason, trying to moderate the message, trying to bring different factions together. But every time he tries to calm things down, Trump contradicts him or undermines him or attacks someone Vance was trying to reconcile with. It's political chaos, and it's only getting worse. Trump himself is increasingly isolated and frustrated. He's watching his movement fracture. He's seeing Republicans lose races they should have won. He's dealing with a government shutdown that's hurting his approval ratings. He's fighting with Democrats, with moderate Republicans, with his own allies. And his response to all of this is to double down on the same tactics that are failing. More extreme rhetoric, more attacks, more chaos, more division. This is what the beginning stages of collapse look like. Not a sudden implosion, but a slow unraveling, a gradual loss of cohesion, factions forming, loyalty breaking down, leaders fighting for position in a post-Trump world, the base becoming disillusioned as promises go unfulfilled, swing voters abandoning ship, moderates distancing themselves, and at the center of it all, a leader who's unable or unwilling to adapt. Will MAGA exist after Trump? Probably, in some form. Political movements don't usually disappear completely. They evolve or splinter or get absorbed into something else. But the MAGA that exists after Trump will be weaker, more fractured, less influential. It might be a subset of the Republican Party. It might be a third party that pulls votes from Republicans but never wins major elections. It might be reduced to a cultural movement without real political power. But the MAGA of Trump's presidency, the MAGA that dominated Republican politics and reshaped American conservatism, that version is dying right now. And honestly, that's not even the most interesting part of this story. The most interesting part is what MAGA has exposed about America. Because while they've been in power, while they've been implementing their agenda, while they've been saying the quiet parts loud, they've validated everything Black America has been saying about this country for generations. Let me explain what I mean. Black Americans have always known that America has a white supremacy problem. We've been saying it for 400 years. From slavery to Jim Crow to redlining to mass incarceration to police violence, we've been telling anyone who would listen that this country was built on racism and continues to operate on racist principles. And for 400 years, white America has told us we're exaggerating, we're being divisive, we're playing the race card, racism is in the past, we need to move on. Then MAGA came along and said all the racist things out loud. They proved us right. They validated everything we'd been saying. They showed the world that yes, there are tens of millions of Americans who are deeply uncomfortable with demographic change, who want to return to a time when when white people had unchallenged dominance, who view equality as oppression, who will support openly racist policies as long as they're framed as protecting American values. Black Americans have always known that America's democratic institutions are fragile and can be weaponized against marginalized communities. We've watched courts uphold slavery, segregation, and discrimination. We've watched politicians write laws specifically designed to disenfranchise Black voters. We've watched law enforcement target our communities for violence and incarceration. We've watched economic systems extract wealth from Black neighborhoods. And when we've pointed this out, we've been told we're being paranoid or anti-American. Then MAGA came along and demonstrated exactly how fragile these institutions are. They showed how easy it is to manipulate the system. They showed how courts can be packed with ideological judges. They showed how voting rights can be restricted. They showed how law enforcement can be politicized. They showed how economic policy can be used to benefit the wealthy while harming the poor. They showed how a president can attempt to overturn election results and face minimal consequences. They validated everything we'd been saying about how the system works and who it's designed to serve. Black Americans have always known that a significant portion of white America will choose white supremacy over democracy, over economic self-interest, over basic human decency. We've watched poor white people support policies that harm them economically, as long as those policies also harm Black people. We've watched white voters elect officials who cut social programs they themselves depend on. We've watched white communities sacrifice their own well-being to maintain racial hierarchy. Then MAGA came along and proved it on the national stage. They showed us white voters supporting tax cuts for billionaires while their own communities crumbled. They showed us white voters cheering cuts to programs they depend on. They showed us white voters willing to endure a 35-day government shutdown that stopped their paychecks and benefits because they believed it was necessary to fight against people they perceive as taking too much. They validated everything we knew about how white supremacy functions as a system that harms everyone, including many white people, but persists because it maintains racial hierarchy. Black Americans have always known that American exceptionalism is a myth. We've known that this country is not a beacon of freedom and democracy. We've known that the founding fathers were slaveholders who wrote, "All men are created equal," while owning human beings. We've known that America's prosperity was built on stolen labor and stolen land. We've known that the American dream was only available to some people and was actively denied to others. And when we've said these things, we've been called unpatriotic. Then MAGA came along and exposed how hollow American exceptionalism really is. They showed the world that America is just as capable of authoritarian impulses as any other country. They showed that American institutions can be corrupted. They showed that American democracy can be threatened from within. They showed that Americans can be manipulated by propaganda and conspiracy theories. They showed that America can fail to peacefully transfer power. They showed that America can separate children from parents at borders. They showed that America can let hundreds of thousands die from preventable causes while refusing to implement solutions. They validated everything we knew about America not being exceptional in the ways it claims. This is the great gift MAGA gave to Black America. Validation. For the first time in a long time, we didn't have to convince people that we were telling the truth about this country. MAGA showed them. MAGA exposed the systems. MAGA said the quiet parts loud. MAGA took the mask off. And here's the other critical thing. Black America took a rest, and when we did, the whole system fell apart. Think about that for a minute. For generations, Black Americans have been the moral conscience of this nation. We've been the ones fighting for democracy, for equality, for justice, for human rights. We've been the ones organizing, protesting, voting, pushing this country toward its stated ideals. We've been doing the work of holding America accountable to its own mythology. But in recent years, a lot of Black Americans got tired. We got exhausted. We stepped back. We said, you know what? We've been carrying this country for too long. We've been fighting battles that benefit everyone while getting minimal credit and minimal benefits. We're going to rest. We're going to focus on our own communities. We're going to let everyone else figure it out for a while. And what happened? The system immediately started to collapse. Without Black Americans serving as the guardrails, without Black Americans doing the organizing work, without Black Americans pushing for accountability, the whole structure started to crumble. MAGA rose to power, democratic norms were violated, institutions were corrupted, chaos ensued. This exposed something critical. America's system was never as strong as people claimed. It was only functional because Black Americans were constantly working to hold it together, to push it toward justice, to fight for its best principles. When we stepped back, even temporarily, the weakness of the entire structure became obvious. That's powerful information. That's leverage. Because now we know that this country needs us more than it wants to admit. The system cannot function without our participation, without our labor, without our moral clarity, and knowing that gives us negotiating power. power. So will MAGA exist after Trump? Maybe in some diminished form, but MAGA has already served its most important purpose from Black America's perspective. It exposed the truth about this country in ways that cannot be denied or explained away. Now the question is what Black America does with that information. Do we go back to being the conscience of the nation without demanding anything in return? Do we return to organizing and fighting and pushing for justice while everyone else benefits from our labor? Or do we use what MAGA exposed to demand tangibles, to negotiate from a position of strength, to require that if we're going to participate in holding this system together, we're going to get specific benefits for our communities? I'm advocating for the latter. MAGA showed us that this country will descend into chaos without us. The November 4th elections showed that Democrats can't win without Black voters. The government shutdown showed that the system is fragile. The infighting within MAGA shows that their coalition was always based on shared grievance rather than shared vision. And once they achieved power, they had no idea how to govern effectively. All of this is valuable information for Black America. We now have clear evidence of what we've always known. This country needs us more than it respects us. This country depends on us while taking us for granted. This country benefits from our participation while minimizing our contributions. MAGA's collapse is entertaining to watch. The infighting is satisfying after years of their arrogance. The election losses are gratifying after their predictions of dominance. Trump's frustration is amusing after his claims of being a stable genius. J.D. Vance's impossible position is ironic given his opportunistic attachment to MAGA. But the real story is not MAGA's collapse. The real story is what MAGA exposed during its rise and reign. They pulled back the curtain on American racism, American fragility, American hypocrisy, American weakness. They validated every critique Black Americans have been making for centuries. They proved us right about this country in ways that are undeniable. And when Black America rested, when we stepped back from our role as the nation's moral conscience and democratic guardrails, the entire system immediately showed how weak it actually is. It couldn't function. It descended into chaos. It revealed that all the talk about American strength and American exceptionalism and American democracy was dependent on Black Americans doing uncompensated labor to hold it all together. So yes, MAGA is collapsing. The recent elections accelerated that collapse. The infighting is destroying their cohesion. Trump's frustration is creating more chaos. The government shutdown damaged their credibility. The policies they championed are unpopular. The coalition they built is fracturing, and whatever exists after Trump leaves office will be significantly weaker than what we're seeing now. But MAGA has already accomplished something important, even if it was unintentional. They exposed America's true nature. They validated Black America's analysis. They showed the world what we've been saying all along. They proved that the emperor has no clothes, that American democracy is fragile, that white supremacy is alive and well, that the system is weak without Black participation. The question now is whether Black America will use this information strategically. Will we demand tangibles in exchange for our participation? Will we negotiate from strength rather than weakness? Will we require that if we're going to help hold this country together, we're going to get specific benefits for our communities? Or will we go back to the old pattern of being taken for granted, of doing the work without getting the credit, of fighting for everyone else's freedom while our own community remains marginalized? MAGA may or may not exist after Trump, but what MAGA exposed about America will exist long after MAGA is gone. The question is whether Black America will leverage that exposure into tangible benefits for our communities, or whether we'll continue to participate in a system that uses us while refusing to properly compensate or respect us. I know what I'm advocating for. I'm advocating for Black America to recognize our power, to understand what MAGA exposed, to leverage the system's weakness into concrete benefits for our communities. I'm advocating for us to stop being the conscience of a nation that doesn't want one and start being strategic actors who demand payment for services rendered. MAGA's collapse is just the beginning. What comes next depends on whether Black America decides to use what we've learned or whether we go back to old patterns that have never served us well. That's the real question. Not whether MAGA will exist after Trump, but whether Black America will finally demand what we're worth after MAGA exposed how much this country needs us.